Well, thank you for making the time today. I appreciate your talking with us about the new album.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
I'm talking with cellist Karlos Rodriguez, who is from the Catalyst Quartet and many other things. I was looking through your bio and marveling at all the things that you've done over the years. But we're going to talk about this project that is ongoing with the Catalyst Quartet. It's called Uncovered. You've released a couple of albums. The first one was Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. The second one was Florence Price. And now you've got three different composers on this next disc, and volume 3. It's out recently. I want to talk to you about the composers on this disc and the music behind it. But first, let's talk about the Uncovered project as a whole. I wonder if you can give us a rundown on that.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So the Uncovered project began in 2018. We had been encountering music played by friends of ours, have been, diving through archives of recordings and YouTube videos and sort of just the internet, basically, and finding that this music that we seemed to all gravitate towards, that we thought was wonderful, beautifully composed, terrific, was not getting played. And there weren't really any recordings to speak of, and definitely not many recordings of high quality. And we decided that it'd be an important thing for people to hear this music in the way that it was intended by these great master composers. And one way that music gets programmed and played more often is if there's easier access to just what it sounds like already. Um, I think we're not in the space anymore of just taking a score and learning it for the sake of learning it with having no idea about what it sounds like, especially music that wasn't written today, especially if it's not like a new commission or something like that. So in an effort to promote this music and to hopefully get it played more often, we thought that these recordings would help. And by us playing it ourselves in concerts, that the experience of these pieces in live performances would also help. We originally thought that this would be an album of these pieces that we knew of already, and that would be it. However, the name of the project says it all, because as we kept diving in deeper and deeper, we discovered more and more repertoire that needed to be uncovered. So this is now probably going to lead us into 4 volumes of a recording project that was originally supposed to be just one album.
Wow. Well, lovely recordings have come out so far, and I'm so grateful that you managed to share this voyage of discovery, with both myself as a listener and as a presenter, but also with the quartet, as it sounds like to you. You've got 3 different composers on this album now, and William Grant Still, George Walker, and Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson. You wouldn't think necessarily of their styles coming together, but you're able, through the specific pieces that you've chosen, to draw an analogy between those 3 different composers. Can you talk about the philosophy, the musical intent behind this album in particular?
Yes, well, each one of these composers on their own doesn't necessarily have enough repertoire for a string quartet to occupy an entire volume on the Uncovered series. So practically speaking, that's one way that they ended up together. Because the first album being Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, he has enough to fill an album, and Florence Price, as we discovered, has enough to fill 2 albums in volume 2. But practically speaking, that's kind of how they ended up together. But the amazing thing about it is how they actually all relate to one another, because all of these composers were living and working, let's say, in the same time and almost in the same region, and have connections to each other musically, in a way, through their styles and through their influences and through the influences that they created through their writing. And so it's a happy accident that it just all weaves together well, in a way. The way that Perkinson, pulls from the spiritual with the title of his quartet, and that spiritual that he draws from, and that tradition that is inherent with all of these composers in the Uncovered Project in a way, is wonderful. And also his kind of stepping into jazz harmony, which then brings us into the Dean of Great American Music, William Grant Still, and his influences into that jazz age. And then just George Walker being the genius that he is, and having a sort of different yet similar way to express his writing. Even the title of the quartet, the Lyric Quartet, and then the Lyric Quartet of Still, it sort of all connects in a very happy way.
Yeah. I'm glad that you characterize William Grant Still as the Dean of Great American Music. He's usually referred to as the Dean of African American Composers, but that's kind of putting him in a box, as it were, because it really is a wonderful body of repertoire. And
Yeah.
he was obviously, a pioneer for composers of color. Let's talk about that Lyric Quartet by George Walker, though, because that is a beautiful piece, and it's a little bit atypical of what we expect from George Walker. Can you talk a little bit about the Lyric Quartet and how it unfolds on this recording?
Yes, it's been with our string quartet since the beginning. It's been a part of our voice since the very, very beginning of the Catalyst Quartet. And it's a beautiful work that he wrote and dedicated to his grandmother. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, he published the middle movement as a standalone work. And much like another great American composer who also went to the Curtis Institute, whose last name starts with a B, has a beautiful slow movement. And he also took that out of his string quartet and turned it into a larger orchestral work.
Yeah.
Lyric for Strings, as published by George Walker, exists as a larger string orchestra work. It also can be performed as a string quartet by itself, but it is, in fact, the middle movement of his string quartet.
Yeah.
It's one of the first pieces that we ever played, the lyric for strings as a string quartet, the middle movement of his string quartet, to the point where I'm actually coming to you from California right now, where we're having a big 3-concert celebration of all of other uncovered composers. And we were in California playing concerts, and we were playing a concert with the Barber Quartet and the Lyric for Strings on the same program. And George Walker himself tweeted, he got on Twitter, probably at the age of 89 or something like that, and kind of said, why do these young quartets play only the slow movement from my string quartet? It's a wonderful work, and are they just not up for the challenge or something like that? And so all of these years later,
Challenge accepted. Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, Mr. Walker isn't with us anymore, but the album is out, and we have recorded his Lyric Quartet in its entirety. And I will acknowledge that it is a beast of a piece.
Yeah. Well, it's also part of his legacy, and obviously he still considered it a really important piece of music that was undiscovered and needed to be uncovered, and it's wonderful that you've managed to do that. I've actually heard it in live performance in this area, but I've never seen a recording of the quartet, so that's a wonderful addition to the repertoire. And speaking of the repertoire, now you've covered 5 composers so far. I mean, how are you deciding who's in, who's out? Is there a criteria for that? Do you have advisors or collaborators? How does that work?
Well, we have collaborators through the repertoire that we need, like Anthony McGill, the great clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic and beyond, and also Stuart Goodyear, an incredible Canadian pianist, sort of like a Glenn Gould style genius.
Yeah.
And Michelle Can, who's been doing great work with the music of Florence Price. So we have collaborators when we need to for the repertoire that exists for quintet, let's say. Our advisors are our friends, are our colleagues, are people that know this repertoire or know something about this portion of the repertoire, that we can collect all of that and collate it and put it together. We have had people like Dr. Urjing Kang in Arkansas help us get physical scores of Florence Price, for example, from the library, from her archives of music that's never been recorded. So like on that album, there are world premiere recordings that we play off of her manuscript because they're not even published yet. So we have, it takes a village, and not to mention the fundraisers and all of the people that that help support these projects financially that we are so grateful for. But the selection process for Uncovered as it exists is basically to highlight the music of historically important Black composers. So that would, I guess, mean that they're no longer with us, and that it has to be people that obviously wrote music for a string quartet. And so this is what we've found so far. Volume 4 will most likely be the string quartets of Joseph Bellon, the Chevalier of Saint Georges.
Okay.
And so that will potentially complete the historically important Black composers and music for string quartet. Now, Uncovered can go on when we talk about Latin American composers, even women composers, Amy Beach or Rebecca Clark, or all of, you know, so it has other lives it can live. But I think it's important, and it has been for the Catalyst Quartet through our whole, now going on 13 years, to highlight music that might need a second chance to be reconsidered.
You say the Catalyst Quartet has been around for 13 years. Can you take us back to how it formed and what the purpose of the quartet coming together was?
Well, the purpose of the quartet coming together was to reimagine and redefine the classical music experience through chamber music and through the string quartet. And that for us meant challenging the canon, challenging the repertoire, challenging the people that listen to classical music and the string quartet, to challenge the composers that were being commissioned to write new music for a string quartet, and to tell stories through music that are larger than just, you know, the old piece, the not so old piece, and the new piece on a program, and to weave programming together into a way that spoke about social issues, that spoke about literature or art, or reflected, you know, our current political climate or something like that, something that speaks to people in a more profound way that matters, making music that matters to people, I'd say, and not just going to a string quartet concert. But the quartet was originally founded by, I'm one of the founding members. We were all alumni of the Sphinx competition, which is a national competition based in Detroit, Michigan, whose aim is to foster diversity in the arts and classical music in particular. And so we were all laureates of the competition. And one of their missions is to support the ongoing careers of the laureates of the competition. And there were a few of us that were interested in chamber music, and specifically the string quartet. And that was sort of the inception of the quartet, in partnership with our own mission and our own ethos, collectively supported by the Sphinx organization.
Was this project affected by the pandemic? I mean, did you have to change the way that you record and where you record?
I mean, I think everything, we've all been affected by this. And I think that the Uncovered project, I will say, in 2018, we thought, you know, given where we all come from and our perspectives, that this is a no-brainer of a project. Everyone's gonna love it. It's important. It makes sense. It's real. And nobody really cared. And it was like, you know, crickets out there for fundraising or for people to put it on concert series and to program it in different halls. And then, unfortunately, through the tragic events of 2020 with George Floyd and our social reckoning and everybody else who's been affected by police violence and other injustices in our country, the Uncovered Project then became something important. And it sort of gained interest. And it's an unfortunate thing that it had to happen because of these terrible events. But we were very happy to be there at the ready in order to speak to what our country was going through at the time. And through the pandemic, it was a source for us to respond in a more profound way through music in any way that we could with all of this repertoire and programming it, because it sort of there was a duality in it, because it was speaking to our political and social climate, but it was also speaking to arts and healing in a time when we all needed some comfort in some way. And the challenges of recording were considerable, because finding spaces that were open to record and navigating schedules and traveling and all of that stuff, of course, considerable. But I think that the importance of it outweighed all of the difficulties.
Yeah, I think it's interesting and wonderful that you're talking about moving on to the Chevalier de Saint-Georges as your fourth and final, perhaps, subject in this particular series. You know, he lived at the same time as Mozart. He was a remarkable figure in the history of classical music, and definitely serves as a pioneer or a trailblazer for composers of color. And I wonder, you know, when you put that in context of everything else that you do, on the surface, you would think, oh, it's just another recording of Saint-Georges. There aren't that many recordings, actually, of his music. But in context of what you've been talking about, the mission of Catalyst, I think it really takes on a new kind of significance to the whole project as a whole. Would you agree with that? Do you have thoughts on that? Or is there
Absolutely.
a spoiler alert involved? Or
there's no spoiler alert, but it is, as you said, challenging to find recordings of these quartets. There are many.
Yeah.
But I think that what it does is it kind of, and it's interesting to do it after doing the other 3 volumes, because the string quartet was created around the time that he was writing this music. Even the forms of his string quartets are not traditional, you know, Haydn-esque string quartet forms with the scherzo and the minuet trio, slow movement, outer movements. They don't follow that form. So the quartet is still kind of being figured out in a way. And given that we are a string quartet, which is an old genre in a way, if you think about it, although we're not trying to be the powdered wig group, having said all of the 3 volumes of Uncovered, and now going back to the origins, let's say the time and the origins of the string quartet as a form, as a sort of wrap up, I think is an interesting journey. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. As the saying goes, in the ending is my beginning.
Yes.
Somehow that's related to what you're talking about. We
Yeah.
talked a little bit about the George Walker piece. I wonder if we can focus on Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson for just a moment. Wrote some really incredible music, a lot of it for strings. And what's the repertoire? What did you have to choose from and work with when it came to Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson? Who was the longest? Was he the longest lived, or when did he pass?
I think George Walker was the longest lived.
George Walker, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Perkinson, he has some chamber music, and he has some smaller symphonies, sinfonietas, they're called, like string symphonies. And we've all kind of had experiences with him and his music. The string quartet is his big opus for string quartet. And personally, in our quartet, one of our first mentors is Sanford Allen, who was the first Black member of the New York Philharmonic, appointed by Leonard Bernstein. And he has been with us since the beginning. and advised us and has been a personal mentor of mine. And I've played with him some repertoire. I bring him up specifically because it ties us to Perkinson personally, because Sanford Allen is one of the first people to really support Perkinson in commissioning music for solo violin and the chamber music, and really was a dear friend of Perkinson, or as he called him, Perky. And it's wonderful to have that connection. Perkinson actually wrote a small movement for a string trio, which we are playing tonight. And I played it with Sanford Allen, and I was very grateful to do so because I believe he was part of commissioning that work. Wow. And on that same program, he played blues forms for solo violin, which he commissioned. And so that's special for us, and it's a connection. The piece itself is genius. It's crazy how beautiful, how intricate, how well crafted, how it speaks to the spiritual, yet brings us into a different sort of harmonic language, rhythmic language with rhythmic energy, and just a stunning, beautiful slow movement, haunting. It's very taut and concise. It's a wonderful piece.
Yeah, I have heard some of his music, and it's always engaging and interesting to the ear, I think, at any level. So
Yeah.
This is a wonderful addition to the repertoire. This is a little bit of a digression, but I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in the cello. I'm always interested in how musicians get hooked on a certain instrument. What's your background with the cello?
Well, I don't come from a particularly musical, as far as musicianly family. I grew up going to a lot of concerts in Miami, Florida. My family is Cuban American, and was very fortunate to be exposed to music, all music, at a very early age. The American musical theater, opera, ballet, orchestra concerts, chamber concerts, solo recitals, all of that stuff I was dragged to as a kid. And I just wanted to be a part of that world somehow. And I thought maybe the violin would be the thing. And the violin didn't work out, because when we finally got to the local music school, the violin teacher wasn't there. And the lady at the front desk said, "My son plays the cello, and the cello teacher's here. You should sit in on a lesson to see if you like her teaching style." And I didn't even know what a cello was by name. And I said, sure, because I was afraid that if I said no, we wouldn't get back there. It took long enough to get there the first time. So I ended up playing the cello from that moment on, and was lucky to be growing up in Miami at a time when the classical music scene was quite alive, because it was around the time when the New World Symphony was beginning, and Michael Tilson Thomas was creating that. And so there was a lot of opportunity there. The local youth symphony, the Greater Miami Youth Symphony, was in full swing, doing wonderful things. It was the beginning of the New World School of the Arts, where I went to high school. The great Miami Quartet was in their prime teaching there, teaching artists. And John Delancey, who was the director of the Curtis Institute and principal oboist of the Philadelphia Orchestra, legend for many years, actually was the music dean for my high school.
And the father of the Star Trek actor, we should add.
Yes.
For those who are science fiction buffs like myself.
And also the wonderful impresario Judy Drucker, who brought every great artist to Miami, whether she could afford it or not, they came. And so I saw Rostropovich in recital, and I would see Janos Starker every season, and had direct contact and exposure to all of this as a kid. And that really inspired me, along with my cello teacher at the time, Barbara Corsillo. And so we find a way, if you want to be a musician and have a life in music, there's a way. It's not always easy. I wasn't growing up in New York City or something like that, where I live now, where it's just everywhere. but you can find a community, and I think I was lucky to do so. And from there, it just, went to college and went to music camps and started off. But
Yeah.
because of the exposure that I had early on, I think my musical interests are quite varied, and so I'm not just stuck in a classical interest lane, I would say.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful story. I loved hearing that. String quartets are more than just performers. They do more than just play the music. They also interact with the community, and they create projects like the recording project and beyond that you're working on. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about some of the other activities of Catalyst in addition to just these recordings.
Yeah, we are a commissioning ensemble, so that means that we engage with composers to write new music for us. The most recent large-scale project that we did is called CQ Minute, Catalyst Quartet Minute, where we decided to take our dwindling attention spans, which are basically under 2 minutes at the time when we started that project, but I believe it's 47 seconds now. And we decided to fill that small attention span with the greatest content possible. And so by commissioning composers like Paquito de Rivera and Joan Tower and Caroline Shaw to write music in that small amount of time, that's sort of another aspect of what we do, commissioning. We also commissioned a phenomenal young Cuban composer to write a cello quintet. His name is Jorge Amado, and he recently emigrated to the United States from Havana. So we're engaging overseas and trying to sort of bring out compositional talent all over the place. Also, education is a huge part of what we do when it comes to going into schools, when it comes to giving master classes or teaching. Educational residencies that we have done through the Sphinx organization, and beyond, at universities and conservatories all over the world, actually. And so that's a big focus for us, is education and pedagogy. Being good people is very important, and good colleagues, and trying to just contribute something positive to our musical landscape. And that's also can speak through our collaborations, that we're always, looking to collaborate with different artists. We have a really exciting collaboration this spring with the world famous ballet dancer Germán Cornejo of the American Ballet Theater. And we're doing that at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where we are the quartet in residence. And so that's a big dance and string quartet live moment that will happen. And so, bending and stretching the genre to reach as many audiences as possible through good content and good energy. I think that's sort of the largest of what we do.
Yeah. You mentioned dance, and I read in your bio that you favor dance, that you've done work with other dancers and dance-related music. What's your interest in dance?
So one of the, building blocks of music is rhythm, or pulse, I should say, more specifically, inner pulse. And music is all about, dance is all about gesture and timing and motion and pulse, rhythm. Even the way they count off, and some depends on the genre, like 5, 6, 7, 8. It's all related to that. But for me personally, and so dancers rely on music to do what they do, but collaborating with dance I find interesting because we have the metronome, and we think a lot about, pulse and rhythm as far as organizing beats and using a metronome to get things really tidy and all of that stuff. But when you think organically about rhythm and how rhythm was actually created, dance is kind of the embodiment of that because of gravity, and because of, if we're going to move our bodies through a space and create some kind of physical gesture, how does gravity affect that? and how does timing affect, how does timing intersect with gravity, and it's an interesting thing to see the body move gesturally through space and how that relates to pulse and rhythm. And it's actually finite, and there are parameters. And then there are those exalted moments when somebody's flying across the stage and you lose all sense of time and space. And that can be musical too. So I think that there is an organic relationship to dance and music that I find interesting, more than just the fact that it's a cool way to connect with another art form, which it also is.
I think if you hadn't been a cellist, you easily could have been a choreographer or a philosopher or a scientist or something along those lines.
Maybe.
Folks can read more about your projects and this album at the website, which is catalystquartet.com. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. We'll link to that definitely when we post this video. I've been talking with the cellist Karlos Rodriguez from the Catalyst Quartet. Their newest album is Volume 3 in the Uncovered series of recordings, music of George Walker, Coleridge-Taylor Perkinson, and William Grant Still. Karlos, it's been a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thank you so much. A pleasure to join you.